Hi, my YouTube viewers. It is Palestine here. Welcome to my channel. I wanted to make another video. I've got so many things that I can talk about and so many things that I can discuss because so much has happened to me in my life that I feel like I need to talk about it, and I want to get it on YouTube. Even though I can't say names, I can't expose people as much as I would like to. I just have to talk about it in general terms. So one of the things that I want to talk about in this video is keys. So when I very first started working in Foster Wheeler, I was a single person. I didn't have any dependents. I didn't have anybody. So what I had done was I had taken a spare set of keys and put them in my drawer at work. And my drawer at work didn't lock, so the keys were there. But the door, the section of the building that I worked in did actually have a pass protector. So you had to actually have your ID card to actually get into that part of the building. So it wasn't totally insecure. It was partially insecure. And they also had security guards. So they had security guards in the building, and the section of the building that I worked in, you had to have an ID card to actually get in there. And since I was a single person on my own, no friends, no dependents, no family, I was a perfect person to terrorize. I took a set of keys, I put them in my drawer at work. A few people knew that I had a set of keys in my drawer at work. Like, I think that my Iranian boyfriend knew that I had a set of keys. And this one lady, I can't remember her. Yeah, I do remember her name, but I can't say it. And she worked in proposals, and she wasn't very nice to me. She, thought she was something really special. She was a manager, she was a business manager, and she would work with the clients, and she thought she was something really special. And I would hear her talking about me to people, not in a very complimentary way. So I think she knew I had a set of keys in my drawer. And then so obviously, because Foster Wheeler had a gang stalking ring, so I'm sure they went through my drawers. My drawer didn't lock. I didn't have a key to my drawer, so my drawer didn't lock. So I'm sure they went through my drawers and they found the keys to my apartment. And then so basically, it wasn't long after I moved into this apartment, because I had changed my job. I'd started working at Foster Wheeler on a permanent contract of employment, and I'd left my Scottish ex-boyfriend because he was being very disrespectful to me, and I was having panic attacks. No, I was having panic attacks because of the disrespectful way that he treated me. And then so in one of my videos, I talk about my ex has moved on. In that video, I talk about how he treated me. And so I moved into my own apartment. And then whenever I moved into my own apartment, and basically what happened was we had really officially split up at New Year's, because he had a tantrum at New Year's. And then when he had a tantrum at New Year's, I didn't want to see him anymore. And so I was really depressed for a couple of months after we broke up. But he wasn't depressed. He went on and lived his life. And because I didn't have any family, friends, dependents, the perfect person to gang stalk, I had put this set of keys in my in my desk drawer. So people at Foster Wheeler, obviously, they had gotten a hold of the keys, and which I didn't know there was a gang stalking ring at Foster Wheeler until the end. Until the end, I knew there was a gang stalking ring at Foster Wheeler. If it's done in business, it's called mobbing. If it's done outside of business, it's called gang stalking. So you can use the word gang stalking and mobbing interchangeably. And then so basically what happened was they would go into my house even early on when I hadn't worked for Foster Wheeler very long. I would come home and strange things would be happening in my home, like someone would take a package that had been sent to me in the post, and this was at the time when the postman would actually come deliver post to your door. They don't do that anymore. And the package would actually be in my apartment, and I would get scared and I would think, well, how did that happen? Because the package won't fit. Well, obviously they had come into my apartment and they had put the package there because it wouldn't fit through the letterbox. So there was no way that you could get that package inside my flat unless you opened the door. And then in addition to Foster Wheeler having a set of keys to my flat, where I live, the housing cooperative where I live, they definitely had a set of keys to my flat. I mean, my flat was at least 30 years old when I moved into it, and now it's like 45, definitely 45 years old now. And so there were 30 years of people living in this flat. There were some other things particular to this flat as well, but I'm not going to say what it is because I don't want to give anybody any ideas. But 30 years of people living in this flat. They had keys to my flat. And then they were saying whenever the last time that my flat was seriously vandalized, the housing cooperative that I live in denied liability. They said they didn't have keys to my flat. I don't believe it. I don't believe they didn't have keys to my flat. What housing cooperative is not going to have keys to the flats? Because the thing is if I didn't pay my rent, or if I moved without telling them, they would have to get into the flat. And I don't believe they didn't have keys to the flat. They said in order for them to absolve themselves of any responsibility for the fact that my flat was being vandalized, they were saying they didn't have keys. I don't believe they didn't have keys. I'm sure somebody in the housing cooperative had keys. I don't believe they didn't have keys, not for a second. But that's what they're saying. They're saying they didn't have keys. How can you run a housing cooperative and not have keys? Even I'm not that dumb. I mean, I don't know much, but I'm not that dumb for them to say they don't have keys. It's just not true. They did have keys. So two people had keys. Foster Wheeler had a set of keys because I've said that I put a set of keys in my desk drawer. And where I live, they say they have keys. They had keys, even though they're denying liability and saying they didn't have keys. What housing cooperative is not going to have keys? Let's be realistic here. And then so, then I got sectioned. The first time. I was given a diagnosis of a mental illness, but I'm not going to say what that is because I don't want to give anybody any ideas. And I told them people were going into my house and doing things. And I'm not going to say on YouTube all the things that these people did because I don't want to give anybody any ideas. I don't want them to think, oh, well, I'll go do that too, So I'm not going to say what they did, but they did do things. And so I had to see a CPN, and I remember her name too, but I can't say it. And basically, she says, well, how could they get in? That's what they always say. Well, how could they get in? You know, like you're nuts. How could they get in? And I just said, well, I told her, I said, I had a set of keys in my desk drawer. So they can't say loop-de-loop, because I had a set of keys in my desk drawer at work. And Foster Wheeler, obviously, or employees of Foster Wheeler, but Foster Wheeler is definitely vicariously liable for this, took the keys, had copies made, and came into my apartment whenever they pleased. And the same thing with the housing cooperative. I'm sure they had keys. I don't believe they didn't have keys. I don't believe even for 1 second that they didn't have keys. That was just their way of denying liability for anything that happened. And so the CPN was saying, well, how did they get in your apartment? Crazy, you know? And I told her, I said, well, I had a set of keys in my desk drawer at work, and I didn't say anything about where I live, people where I live going into my apartment, because at that time I didn't know it was people where I lived. I do know now, because of all the things that happened in my apartment. It had to be somebody who could come and go without arousing any suspicion. And the only way it's going to be somebody who can come and go without arousing suspicion was someone living in this cooperative. And then so basically, I even have a friend, my autistic friend, okay? So things would happen in my apartment, which I've caught my boyfriend doing things, because I'm very careful about what goes on in my apartment. And I have a switch by the toilet. A typical example. Well, someone had switched this switch by the toilet. I know that. I know what switch is. In the UK, they put like a little switch by a power outlet so you can turn the switch off. Okay. Well, someone had turned this switch off. Well, I don't normally turn those switches off, so I knew something had happened. So my autistic friend had been around, and I asked my boyfriend, I said, did you do this switch? He said, no. So I sent my autistic friend a message, and I said, look, did you do that switch? And then my autistic friend said, no, he didn't. And then so he started having a go at me, telling me I'm mentally ill and I'm paranoid and this, that, and the other. Well, and I know I'm not mentally ill like they say I am. I may have a mental illness, but I don't agree with the mental illness that they say I have. And then he said, and then what happened was, so here I am, even my friends are saying I'm crazy. It's bad enough that Prospect Park is saying I'm crazy. It's bad enough that I have to allow Prospect Park to slander me, but even my friends are saying I'm crazy. That should just tell you the kind of friends that I have. And then one time, I caught my boyfriend flipping that switch. So it was my boyfriend. I don't think he knew what he was doing. I think he just did it out of force of habit. I don't think that he thought he would do it just to wind me up and upset me. I don't think that he's that malicious a person to do something like that. And I don't think that he even thought that it would upset me, because he just didn't think it would upset me. But I am very aware of what goes on in my apartment. And it did upset me when he flipped that switch. And when I asked him if he flipped the switch, he should have been honest and said, yes, I did. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. I'm sorry. But he said, no, he didn't flip the switch. So either one, he flipped the switch without realizing he flipped the switch, or he flipped the switch and didn't want to admit to it. But because he didn't admit to flipping the switch, after the fact, I've caught him flipping that switch before. So now my friend is saying I'm mentally ill just because I asked him, did he flip that switch? because I am very aware of what goes into my apartment. And another thing that happened, and it may seem really tiny and minute to you, the viewer, but my boyfriend bought me an electronic clock radio, and it had a piece of plastic on the digital screen. Well, I thought that I had taken this piece of plastic off. And then years later, a couple of years later, there was a piece of plastic on that digital screen, and I thought I'd taken the plastic off. So it's just tiny little things that get done in my apartment that I don't do it. I didn't even have a piece of plastic to put on my digital screen when he gave me this clock radio as a Christmas present. I'm sure I took that piece of plastic off and threw it in the trash. So I don't even have a piece of plastic to put on a digital screen. But somehow or other, a couple years later, that clock radio had a piece of plastic on the digital screen. And I don't know how that happened. But, you know, it's just tiny little things, like when you're being gang stalked. It's just tiny little things. They go into your flat and they do tiny little things to try to agitate you. But then it gets worse. It gets worse. It starts out tiny, and then it gets worse, because eventually these people were breaking things, destroying things, moving things around, vandalizing things. But I'm not going to say any of the things that they did, because I don't want to give anybody any ideas. And I will say that with regard to my keys, that set of keys I have is no longer valid. And the reason why is because where I live, I think they had to replace all the fire doors. And I think they failed an inspection. That's what I think happened. I think they failed an inspection. But they had to replace all the fire doors. So the set of keys that I had when I was at Foster Wheeler is no longer valid. And then when they replaced my fire doors, they actually told me the name of the person who they had given a spare key to. So I know the name of the person who they had given a spare key to. So if anything happens in my apartment again, I'm going to know that it was the housing cooperative that did it, because the housing cooperative has a spare key. So that's just it. That's the thing that I wanted to talk about in this video, is keys. Because that's one of the things that they'll say is, well, how could they get in? They didn't have keys. And any criminal can get into a house. The only thing that locks do is keep honest people honest. Any criminal can get into a house. Any locksmith can get into a house. So for them to, I don't even know if patronize is the correct word, but then for them to patronize me and say, well, how can they get in? They didn't have a key. Criminals don't need keys. Criminals can pick a lock. Criminals can hire a locksmith. So it's just absolutely ludicrous to think that a criminal can't get into my flat because he's not got a key. A criminal can pick a lock. A criminal can get a locksmith. You know, a criminal can steal a key and get a key copied. So I think that's going to be it for this video. I just wanted to explain to my viewers how individuals got keys to my flat, and they were able to go into my flat when I was working, when I was out of my flat, and also when I was sleeping. So that's just one of the things that I wanted to discuss in this video. So if you ask yourself, how could they get into your apartment without a key? Well, I'm telling you now, they had keys. There were two groups of people that had keys. Number one being Foster Wheeler, and number two, the housing cooperative where I live. And failing that, if they wanted to get in bad enough, they could have hired a locksmith to open the door, or they could have picked the lock. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching my video. Thank you so much for taking an interest in my life, as pathetic as it may be.